Hello and welcome to my channel. Yes, it's another drawing of a tree, but this time it's in oil pastel as a part of this series where I'm trying out this new medium. So let's have a look. So this time I wanted to do a landscape, and first I'm going to do a quick sketch to work out the position of the tree and some other things in the scene. No reference for you this time. We're just going to make a simple landscape, and I'm going to try to create a nice looking tree. What I want to have is a row of trees in the background, like a meadow in the foreground, a nice blue sky with some clouds, and a large tree in the middle of the scene, taking up most of the paper. Anyway, the paper I'm working on again is the UART 800 sanded paper, like the last time when I did that frog drawing. And the size is a little bit larger. This time it's about 9 times 12 inches. The oil pastels I'm using are the same ones like the last time, the Jieso Chinese brand. And first I'm putting in some lighter shapes, lighter details with a white oil pastel. The reason why I wanted to do this is because I wanted to minimize the amount of muddying, and I wanted to minimize, I wanted to make sure that these lightest portions of the scene would be almost completely white, and later I will work around them and maybe a little bit on top of them with a light blue pastel. So I'm working with a light blue pastel now, as you can see, and I'm working around the shape of those clouds which I drew initially. I want to make sure that those clouds stand out nicely against the background. The reason why I'm stressing this is because with these oil pastels I can work from light to dark as well as from dark to light, but there are limitations to that, and if you want a really clean mark, really clean shape, then it's better to put down the lighter color first. Even though I will be going back and forth with lighter and darker pastels. So you can see that here I'm doing some blending, and for these larger parts of the background I'm blending with my fingers because it's a quick and easy way to blend this very smoothly and very thoroughly. Now I have to say that this is something that I also noticed when I was doing the drawing of a frog. On this surface, the UART 800, when blending oil pastels, the paper is a little bit harder on your fingertips than soft pastels, probably because there's more friction. So the next time, the next drawing, which I'm also going to do with oil pastels, is going to be done on maybe some other type of paper. Here you can see that I'm softening the edges of these clouds, fluffing them up a little bit, making them look a bit more natural. At the top, I want that top edge to be a little bit cleaner, to have a nice clean shape against the background blue color of the sky. And the rest of it, I want it blended smoothly without any textures, lines, details, anything of a sort. In order to be able to blend it smoothly, I have to make sure that I have a sufficient amount of material, that I put down enough of the pastel, otherwise it just won't blend very evenly. So as you can see, I mostly worked around those lighter shapes, and here in the middle I don't really have to put down as much of the pastel because that's where the tree is going to be, so I don't have to make sure that I don't really have to try to cover that part of the scene that thoroughly. I fluffed up the shape of those clouds a little bit, and I think they look nice and realistic now. I'm just going to blend the rest of the background, and once that is done I can go back in with a white pastel and maybe add some additional details working on top of the blue. So you can see here that I'm actually able to work from dark to light. I can put in those lighter shapes and they do show against this blue background. But sometimes those marks aren't always as clean. So that's why with the brightest parts of the clouds I wanted to put down the white pastel first. Anyway, I'm starting to work on the tree now. And I'm going to use something like a mid-tone green, but it's a yellowish green. And first, I'm not going to go in with a heavier application or anything like that. I'm mostly going to use it to sketch out the shape of some of these clusters of leaves. So I want to give myself and you an idea about the overall shape of the tree, as well as those segments within a tree, because the tree, I can't just draw a huge green shape. I need to break it up into smaller segments, and then I need to draw some branches between them. For the branches I'm going to use a couple of browns and a bit of black pastel. But there's another thing to notice here as I'm drawing these branches, and I switch to a dark brown pastel here. I'm actually drawing interrupted shapes of those branches. That's because some of those branches and boughs will be hidden by all the foliage. So I don't have to draw a full line, and I don't have to draw all of those branches. Just a few suggestions of branches here and there which are visible through the foliage will be enough to give us the idea that we're looking at a tree with lots of branches. Anyway, now I'm starting to work on the foliage, and now I'm going to be putting down a lot more of this yellowish green pastel. The reason why I picked this yellowish green is because it's a slightly warmer green, and I felt that whichever green I apply on top of the blue sky, the greens are going to be influenced by the cooler color in the background. So I wanted a slightly warmer green. That's why I went in with that yellowish green. On top of that, I'm using some black pastel, black oil pastel, and this is the approach that I've been using in many of my drawings of trees. I mostly use two colors, like a combination of green and black. That creates a texture that looks like foliage, and it's a very simple method that I've been using in many of my drawings, whether I was using pastels like soft pastels or pastel pencils or colored pencils, and now I'm using the same approach with oil pastels. But it's a little bit different now because these are so creamy and soft. I can't just drag the black pastel pencil on top of the green and hope that it will produce a texture that looks like foliage. That would kind of muddy the colors, and it wouldn't really create the effect that I like, which is why I switched to a stippling technique, which mostly consists of dabbing my oil pastels to create dot-like small marks, and a combination of those lighter and darker marks will hopefully give me something that looks like foliage. Now, this is a little bit of a, how should I put it, a time-consuming process, because you need to draw a lot of these tiny marks. But it helps to create a very nice looking texture that looks like foliage. Of course, you don't have to do it this way. So most of my drawings are kind of a little bit more on the realistic side. Some of them are a little bit more on the impressionistic side. If you want to draw a tree that is a little bit more impressionistic, you don't have to use such techniques. You don't have to use stippling. You can just draw the shape of that cluster of leaves and then maybe add some darker colors to shade it a little bit, and maybe just a few suggestions of leaves here and there, and that would be enough to create a tree that still looks fairly realistic, but like I said, is a little bit more on the impressionistic side. Ultimately, it's up to you how much detail you want to put in and how much effort you want to put into that texture. For me, I wanted to put in a little bit more work on this texture, which is why I created a lot of these small marks. Sometimes I would drag the oil pastel and create small marks kind of going back and forth, sometimes using a small circular motion, but a lot of the times I would just use that stippling motion, and I would especially do that when I'm applying the black pastel on top of the green in order to get that nice looking texture. Because when you look at foliage, when you look at foliage at a distance, what you will see is a bunch of like a combination of tiny lighter and darker shapes. So here, as you can see, I drew some of these smaller branches connecting some of those clusters of leaves, and here I'm drawing some of those larger shadow areas of darker foliage. These are very important if you want to create a three-dimensional looking canopy, because in that canopy some of those clusters of leaves will be closer to the surface. They will be kind of bulging out or protruding outwards, which means that they are closer to the light source and more exposed to the light source, which is why they're going to be a lot lighter. Others, like those darker shapes or combinations of darker shapes which I drew in between those lighter shapes, they are further away from the light source. They are maybe deeper in the canopy, and not as much light is reaching them, which is why they are so much darker. But this contrast in value and this combination of lighter and darker shape is what allows us to create a more three-dimensional looking and a more realistic looking canopy. This is a process that takes a little bit of time. You can't really get it right all at once, especially if you're not using a specific reference photo, if you're kind of trying to draw a generic tree, which means that I will be experimenting, adding details, maybe taking away details if I can. Here I'm doing a little bit of scratching with a pointed wooden stick in order to create a finer texture, because sometimes you can scratch away some of the layers of the darker pastel, and what that will create is it will create a finer texture that you wouldn't be able to create with an oil pastel stick, because the oil pastel sticks, they give you slightly larger marks, and sometimes you just want a smaller mark or a finer texture. Now sometimes you can create thinner marks or smaller marks depending on which part of that tip of the oil pastel you're using. You can see that I was actually able to draw some very tiny and thin looking branches in there, but it's not something that I can always do. Sometimes it works, sometimes not so much. So I just sort of do what the oil pastel allows me to do. So if I look back to my drawing of that poison dart frog, which I did before this one, I think I'm already learning a little bit. I'm kind of learning to apply the oil pastels a little bit more efficiently. I'm learning to reduce the amount of muddying and the amount of mess. But because it's a new medium for me, there will be a period of that adaptation, and there will be a learning period. But then again, I always stress this: every single drawing is a new learning experience. It doesn't really matter how much experience you already have as an artist. Every time there will be some challenges, every time you will have to do something different, and every time you will run into certain difficulties. Here you can see how I'm emphasizing these darker shadow areas between those lighter clusters or under those lighter clusters, and how I made some parts of those tree branches which are visible I made some of them darker because those clusters of leaves are casting a shadow onto them, and I left some parts of those branches a little bit lighter, like they're maybe a little bit more exposed to the light source. So I think I'm already making a little bit of progress with these oil pastels, but I have to tell you, there is a lot of transfer from other types of media that I've used so far, because oil pastels, when you think about it, are really not that different from soft pastels. Yes, of course, soft pastels are kind of chalky and the composition is different, but the way you apply them is not that dissimilar. Some of the same rules apply, and of course when drawing and shading objects, some of the basic rules always apply. You always have to be aware of the light source. You always have to make sure that you describe those larger relationships of lighter and darker values. So I could spend all day just stippling and trying to produce a nice looking texture that looks like foliage, but if I don't create those larger shadow areas, and if I don't create contrast between those larger areas of shadow and those lighter areas, those lighter clusters of foliage which are more exposed to the light source, I won't create a realistic looking tree. So like I said, some of the general stuff which you already have to know, which you already have been doing, even if you haven't tried this particular medium, that still applies, which speeds up the learning process and which still allows you to create some decent looking drawings. I think the canopy is starting to look a lot fuller now. The foliage is starting to look denser as well as more realistic, but this is not really something that you can accomplish all at once. And there's another thing happening here which I really like, which is how easily and relatively cleanly I was able to draw all of that foliage, all of that canopy against that sky, in which I already had a couple of layers of that white and blue pastel. I don't really think I would have been able to do the same thing quite as easily and quite as cleanly if I were working with any other medium. Here, these are showing up very nicely against that blue sky, and I'm able to get a very nice clean shape with some very nice vibrant colors. I'm adding a little bit more foliage here and there, kind of modifying the shape of the canopy as I go along. The tree trunk will be here, or at least the bottom part of the tree trunk will be here, and first I started with a little bit of this lighter brown. It's kind of like a grayish dull brown color, and then in other places maybe I'm going to use a little bit of this darker brown. And of course for the shadow areas, both on the foliage and the tree trunk, I'm using a black pastel, a black oil pastel. Here at the bottom I'm adding some more of this darker foliage. I'm going to concentrate these darker marks using a combination of approaches, but for the most part again using that stippling motion, but I'm not really, you can see that I'm varying the shape as well as the size of my marks. It's not just stippling is not quite as simple as just dabbing your oil pastel. You can see that I'm trying to create a little bit of variation to create marks that kind of look like foliage, where some of those leaves are a little bit larger than others, or some of those groups of leaves are a little bit larger than others. Now I'm drawing that meadow, adding some of those lighter greens there. And here I made a bit of a mistake because I started drawing that darker foliage at the bottom, so that created a little bit of muddying. I should have gone in first with a lighter color, with a brighter color, but that's okay because I'm going to be working over that anyway. And here at the bottom I want this tree trunk to be a little bit wider, and I want it to kind of split into two large parts of the tree trunk, two large boughs, so the canopy would be nice and wide, and so that it would be covering a huge portion of my scene. A good part of this tree trunk is also going to be in the shadow. We have a lot of shadow there because that thick, large canopy is casting a huge shadow onto the tree trunk as well as the boughs, which is why this area is also mostly dark, but I'm going to leave out some some lighter areas just to make it look like light is breaking through some parts of that canopy. Now I'll have this group of trees here in the background, both on the left side and on the right side. But because these are further away, I will make them a little bit simpler in terms of texture and detail. I will still add a little bit of black pastel here at the bottom and here and there randomly, just to create some suggestions of shadow areas and smaller shapes. And then I will go on top of that with a lighter pastel and kind of blend it by muddying these two colors together. You can see now how the contrast and the texture is disappearing. It's getting a lot softer, and this is exactly the effect that I wanted to achieve, because, as I've already explained, these trees are further away and I don't really need to define them that much in terms of detail and in terms of their shapes. They are just there to provide something in the background to complete the scene. So I think this is a very simple landscape. It has most of the things that landscapes have. It has a nice blue sky, it has some trees, it has a meadow. There isn't going to be any path or fence or anything like that. I'm going to keep it simple, but I'm going to focus most of my effort on this tree. Here at the bottom, as you can see, I'm making this bottom portion of the tree much darker because it's facing down, it's further away from the light source, so there needs to be a lot more shadow there. And I'm covering this lower portion of the paper with that light green, yellowish green pastel. And of course there's going to be a little bit of shadow here under the tree, because that large canopy is casting a shadow onto the grass below or under it, which means that the grass here will be darker green, or I'm just going to put a little bit of black pastel on there as well. So I think this UART 800 paper worked pretty well with oil pastels, because it has a bit of a tooth and it allows the oil pastel to grab onto that tooth. But and the reason why I switched to UART is because the first time I tried these, I tried on a smoother paper and I ran into some smaller problems. But I think it was not just the paper but also my application of the oil pastels. In the meantime, I decided to try out some other papers that aren't necessarily sanded papers, but which have a little bit of a tooth. And we'll see how it goes with those, because I don't think you need to use sanded papers. I think you can use any type of drawing paper that has a little bit more of a tooth, because that'll help with the application and the layering of these oil pastels. But so far I have to say I'm pretty impressed with this medium. The first set, or the first brand of oil pastels that I tried, they didn't work out that well. These, even though they are fairly cheap, actually do what they're supposed to do. They layer, they blend. You can put lighter marks on top of the darker layers, so they do all kinds of things. which make drawing process much easier and give you options when drawing even such complex things such as this one. So I'm going to be doing a lot more work with this medium. First I've done that drawing of a frog, and now I'm doing this landscape, and I don't really know what will be the next one, but we'll decide on that later. So far so good, because this is turning out to be pretty good, I think. I'm just working with a black pastel here, adding some more of those shadow areas of foliage which are deeper in the canopy. These are creating, like I said, additional depth in that canopy, allowing those lighter areas to stand out because of that nice contrast. And that contrast, of course, is extremely important if you want to describe a canopy, if you want to describe a tree as a three-dimensional object. Just doing a little bit more of the background here on the right side. I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the left. I'm going to add a little bit of variation in value, but not too much, because I actually don't want texture and detail there. Here I'm just adding some details to the foreground area, to the grass. It's all just suggestions of maybe some variations in the terrain, in the length and the color of the grass, stuff like that. Nothing special. I don't really need to draw every single blade of grass. Like I said, this drawing is going to be a little bit more on the impressionistic side, even though I think the tree itself is fairly detailed. So I'm just going to keep working on these clusters at the bottom, adding more foliage here. And this darker foliage at the bottom is very important because not only because I have to create those darker areas there because that part of the tree is facing away from the light source, so it's going to be darker, but also because the meadow behind it is lighter, and I deliberately made it that way. And this way those darkest parts of the tree will stand in contrast against those lightest parts of the foreground area, of the meadow area behind it. So that was an opportunity to create a very nice contrast, which would emphasize the shape of the tree and make it kind of more, or rather easier to understand to the viewer. I'm just doing a little bit of refining of these bottom clusters and adding some more shadows here and there. You can see that the canopy now looks much fuller, there's more contrast, everything looks a lot more three-dimensional, and there's just a few more clusters to finish here in the middle and on the right. And once I'm done with that, I just have a little bit more work to do on the foreground area. This was not really quick and easy drawing, I have to say. Not necessarily because oil pastels are difficult to work with. I find that they are relatively easy to work with, but because I picked a fairly complex subject and because the size of the paper was a little bit larger this time. So it took a little bit of time to do this, like a couple of hours. Here on YouTube, I always condense these videos into a slightly shorter format, which is a combination of real-time footage and some time-lapse. But of course, if you want to see what the drawing process looks like in real time, if you want to see full-length narrated footage, you know where to look for it. It's on my Patreon, because I have lots of content there, like hundreds of videos, obviously. So I'm just wrapping things up here, both with the background and the foreground now. Just adding some suggestions of those darker clumps of grass here in the foreground, just to have a little bit of variation there. So I just make some slightly darker marks with a darker green here and there. And then I kind of make them a little bit smaller as you look further away into the distance. I make the ones which are closer to the bottom, closer to our viewpoint, a little bit more defined. I soften that with a slightly lighter pencil, maybe draw a few lighter marks on top of that. And that's pretty much as complex as I want it. I'm just going to soften it even further by dabbing on it here and there with my finger. I don't want the rest of the scene to be too distracting. I want the focus to go to the tree immediately. And now I'm pretty much done with the scene. I put my signature here on the right side, and this is what the finished drawing looks like. I hope you enjoyed the drawing process. Check out my other videos. Don't forget to subscribe and give me a like. Give me a comment, let me know what you think. And also, if you want to see longer videos and more content, check out my Patreon. Bye bye.